All right. Good morning. No, it's not. It's morning. Mornings are never good. All right. So let's look at a couple of things this week. So we're going to start making your programs a lot more interactive. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by using these conditionals. So conditionals sound really horrible. It's really stuff you've already done. We've already done it. We've showed it to you in Excel. We're really looking at how do I start making decisions, and then the decision making can also lead us to something else exciting when we get to it when we start using these decisions to create essentially a loop or a way that we can repeat actions. So now we're going to look at how do I do things like if my input is not what I'm looking for, how do I get them to resend that to me? We can use comparisons. We can strings. We can work with. So we're going to look at a lot of those things. So I think the easiest way here to look at something is really in this kind of a code. So um, take a look here at this one. So we have said number equals 5. Now, here we're saying it's an integer number, so remember that this is kind of that pseudocode we're looking at here. So here we say if number is greater than 0, we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're going to do something else. And then once we pass that, then we're going to come up with something else. So if we look at in Python, so somewhere down here I have a Python window. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to open up a new file just so we can see what it's going to look like. All right. And I'm going to come down just a smidgen in size because it's almost too big. I know it's easier to see, but maybe I won't do that right now. All right. So if I want to come in and I'm going to say I'm going to set a number. So I'm just going to call it num1 is equal to 36. Has no specific requirement, but I'm just setting it to that 36. So I want to do an if statement. So if, and notice again, it turns. So num1 is greater than 40. And notice I have to use that colon. So this block, you are old. So we said a couple of statements there. So we're going to say those will happen if that number is over 36. So on the off chance that we're not, so all right. So I come back and then I'm going to do an else. So if that statement is not true, so the trick with almost anything in our computer world is we really can only ask a set of questions that has a yes or no answer. Remember, we're in this Boolean world. So else, you are young. We've arbitrarily set this cutoff at, and then down here, so anything here, so anything down at this line, we can run whatever we need to do down here. So once we've out of this block, so I'm going to run this real quick, run module, and we'll save it to some kind of name. Yes. So it says you are young because we put that number in at 36. Now, if if we wanted to expand this a little bit, and it's really a set of if then statements, we also have a couple of other things we can do. And one of them I want to look at really, really carefully here is this. So we're familiar with the greater than less than. We know how those work. Here's what's a little tricky. I'm going to make that in here. So if I'm looking for only if a number is equal or a phrase is equal, well, common sense says I'm going to put an equals in there. So if number 1 is equal to 40. Now we know that's not going to be true. It's going to come down here. But in Python, that's an assignment operator. So we actually have to put a double equals in. And this one kills me because my brain, when I go back and try to troubleshoot, is going to say, man, I have a conditional operator there. So only if that happens to be true is that going to work. So, and I can just put that in there like this. Run. So if I don't have that in there, and sometimes this is a good way to do things, it's going to say invalid syntax when it tries to run that. So always remember you got to do that equals. Now where it gets tricky is in some multi-statements. If you're actually assigning it some places and not, it can get a little ugly. All right. So here we have places where you can uh, input things. So here they have a program saying we're going to input what is 2 plus 2. Now, what they've done here is notice they're evaluating strings. So just to be careful of that, remember if you're ever doing an input and you try to compare them. So if we do something very similar, so we're going to do and so I want to look for a magic number. So maybe it's a guessing game where we're going to guess higher or lower. So if is equal to 3, so that would work, but there might be some better ways, and we'll show you how we can manipulate some of those. So print you win. Now this will work. Number please, and we're looking for 3. You win. So if what I'm really trying to do is echo output or something, I could make a whole string of these. And so I could say if is 4, and I could put a whole list of these down, or I could start bundling. So if it's equal to this, that's true. Otherwise, I come down and I start adding some nested conditionals. So you're going to see we have ways that we can accomplish with more than one. So part of that, where we'll make it a little easier, especially if you're doing numbers, is this conversion from one type of number to another. So we know that anytime we get an input from a user, it's coming in as a string. And so we may need to find a way to change that to different types of numbers. So they call it casting. So you can check and see what kind of value it is. So that type function that we've used before. And we also have some ways that we can change things. Here's where it's a little bit of a problem. So I'm hoping my user is smart enough when I say enter a number that they really do. But what if they input something that's not correct? So how do I deal with that? So backwards here for a second. All right. So we're going to work on some of these pieces here. So back to modules. So one of the things I've thrown in here for these 2 weeks that will take us into spring break is, if you look down here, this is actually a Quizlet of different terms. So trying different things, trying to see if we can get you interested in it. So let's add a little bit more to our plate. So we know that we can use the if and the else. So if, else. But what if we added, and not every language has something similar to this, we can actually add something called elif. And so elif is another piece, and it really, programmatically, it's a list of if-then statements. But for our purposes, it lets us do something interesting because we can add pieces in here. So here it says, is it equal to 2? No, you're wrong. And so here we have kind of an interesting statement. It's not equal to 2. You're wrong. But we can then use that else as a cleanup. So if I'm going to do something like this, so let's call it num1 is equal to input, please enter a number. So we're not getting much out of that other than they're going to put in a number of some sort. But I want to have a couple of items. If is greater than 10, you picked a big number. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to say elif num1 less than 10. You picked a small number. And then I'm going to use this else to catch any other conditions that happen to be there. So else, so, and we could put multiples in there. So print call the tech team. All right. So when I run this, let's see what's going to happen, because I think something different than what I expect is going to happen. I'm going to hit F5. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to run and enter a number. Oh, it says, okay, type error. So let's take a look and see what happened. First, I'm going to put a space in there because it'll drive me crazy. All right, so I got a number, and I typed in, I think it was 23. So I set num1 equal to 23. But I did that as a string. Oh, okay, well then what happens if I do this? Because I need to compare strings, right? Okay, so now let's run it and see if that fixed it. Oh, so it did do that, which is weird, and we have a logical error of some sort. So let's run that again. So 10 caused it to hiccup, And there's a couple of reasons on that. Well, one, we really need to change how we're doing this. We're comparing strings, and we can compare strings. And really, 11 will be bigger than 10 because internally we convert them back to some ASCII codes. But um, I want to concentrate on how we fix that. So let's put a 10 in, and let's put our 10 back in there because we've got a couple of issues that we want to look at here. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, really, num1 is equal to, and if I said the integer of num1, so in other words, I've taken this value of number 1, and I'm going to get the integer value, and now I can compare that a little easier. So I'm comparing number to number. So if I enter a number 11, it should say, all right, 11 is greater than 10, so this is true, and it's going to run this statement. You picked a big number. If I'm going to say, if I put in 8 or something under that, that works. But at a particular juncture here, so if I actually pick 10, let's see what's going to happen. So is 10 greater than 10? No. Is 10 less than 10? No. So we have to look at, sometimes we need a slightly different definition in here. So what we might think about is, do I need a greater than or equal to? Now, I have one little step I got to think about though. If I'm using equals to 10 here, I don't want to use it here. So we have to say, is it greater than or equal to 10 or less than 10? So we'll make a grade comparison, and I'll show you what we're looking at there. So run. So now 10 says it's a big number, and it doesn't cause that else. All right, one more thing to look at here real quick. So we're going to put in a number, and I put in ABC. Oh, man. It can't convert ABC to a numeric. And unfortunately, at this point, we get this error that says, oh, crud, that's not what we wanted to do. So we need to think a little bit more about how we can get in a number. Well, easiest way, I think, because if we tell the users to do that, that's going to work really well, right? Yeah. So we may need to think a little bit more about how we can validate that input. All right. So typecasting here, we're just taking this idea of casting it to an integer. Now, um, you can also use different number systems, but let's not do that yet. So casting functions, int, string, and float are the typical ones we use. So, kick into that. Go backwards again. All right. So we've got typecasting down. We've got these integers down. We're ready, I think, to start looking at some of this activities and try to see if we can come up with a way to work on some of those. So there is a PowerPoint here you are welcome to look at. I'm probably not going to go over just that particular thing. So let's take a look at this particular module. And again, I have to go in and edit these and take out any reference to their videos, but we'll just make our own, and that's fine. All right. So the first thing we've got in this one is we have a couple of things about sequence. So sequence is just how we go in order. So we're going to look at a couple of things here. So let's take a look at, we need to open up our IDI of some sort. So somewhere down here I have this. All right. both of these on the same screen at the same time. All right. And again, I'm in a fairly large. Let's just start over from scratch. And I'm going to come down and make that a little smaller. So let's go down to, see if 29 will still be big enough to see. Okay, file new. All right. So first thing, we have to give it a name. So here we're going to call it U1 M2, comma A3-BG because that's still my initials. So make sure you're commenting these because it will come back, especially if you stop working on something and you come back and you go, where was I? What was I doing? So we have to think like the computer does. So here we have a function. So we have a hat program. So number 6, we have a hat program. So have hat and have hat available green. So the first thing I think I'm going to do to make my life easier, if I can get it to copy and paste, is I'm going to paste this in here. Now, I'm going to take out this last line, concept. All right. Couple of things we got to remember. It's always going to mess up my quote marks. So I know that I'm going to have to fix those. And it probably is going to screw up my indents. So here we have our definition. Here we have a return statement. All right, somewhere over there, there's another quote mark I suspect I need to fix. All right. So let's scroll back to this and take a look and see if we can figure out what's going on or why it may not function. We can run it, actually. Call it M3 to save it real quick. An indented block not found. Okay, so a couple of things we got to do formatting wise is I need to move this in. All right, and that return should be at the same level here, except I do this. It's got a capital R. Not a horrible thing, but all right. So now we have our function, and above it we have our mainline code. Now, Python will probably not argue about that because weirdly you can put functions about anywhere. It's bad practice just because it looks odd. So I tend to come up here and I'm going to have begin functions and then like a trailer to say end functions, just so I know where I'm at. So our function is hat available, and we pass in a variable, and then the hat colors equals black, red, blue, green, etc. So return color dot lower in hat colors. Okay. So have hat equals hat available green. So in other words, this is what's going to get returned out of passing in the word green. So let's run it and see what happens, just for giggles. Return outside of function. Okay, so my return, I need to bring in so that it shows that it's part of this function. Hat available is true. Oh, okay. Why would I get a true value? Have hat equals available green. So I need to look at this and make sure that I don't have something really weird. So let's think about what this program is going to do. So it passes in green up here into this hat available. We can check that. So let's take a look and see if we can come up with a way to test some of this. So I'm going to put in a print statement just so we see what is actually in that value of color. So shouldn't hurt anything, and we can take it back out. But a lot of times, so it does pass in green. Hat available is true. Okay. So we have another issue somewhere in here, but it is passing in. It is passing in that green color here. So I don't need this statement anymore, but maybe just leave it in as a test statement, make it go away. All right. So I want to return a value. And right now it's just returning, is that true? So let's take a look at that. So that's going to return a Boolean value. So that's what we actually are hoping for. It's going to say color.lower. So whatever's the value here, it's going to convert to lowercase. And it's going to search through there to see if green is in there. Well, let's check that just a little bit. So let's look for purple. So now it says hat available is false. So maybe I need to make this a little bit better. So if I get my hands anywhere near the right keys, it would be good. So it would say here, purple hat available is false or something. So now we can run that, and it's going to actually print the color of what we have. So we could say hat available blank not there. All right. So we could change this all around, but what we're passing out is this idea of the Boolean values, true, false. It's kind of nice. We don't have to create a search. So in a lot of languages, we'd have to create a search to go through and check every item in this list, black, red, blue, green, white. Python does it for us, and we can do it this easily. We can say, I want to look for this in hat colors. This dot lower, the reason we're doing that is we know that these items are in lowercase. And if down here we had an uppercase, so if I had red, it's going to return that it's false, even though we do have that value available. So it's going to say it's false. Oh, okay. So it's really nice that we can search through those strings, but that dot lower function is kind of a handy thing. Or upper. You can convert them either way, honestly, but what you're trying to do is make sure that, so color.lower in hat colors. You're just searching through it and making sure that that works. So one of the things we'd like to not do, though, is typically we don't hard code in values like that. So, all right, let's take a look at number 7. I'm going to delete this for now. So number 7, it's a bird program. Input a bird name to check for availability and print a statement informing the user of availability. Create a function called bird available. Bird types equal crow, robin, parrot, eagle, sandpiper, hawk, and pigeon. Return true or false if the bird is found. Call the function using the name of the bird type from user input. So if I'm doing this, I'm going to put a couple steps together, and I'm going to look at this idea. So I'm going to create that function bird available. I need to get user input, call that function that I created, and then see if it's available. Well, honestly, it's very, very similar to what we did up here, right? So we're going to create a function. So we're going to call it bird available. And that function's going to take in something, and it's going to probably take in, maybe we just call it bird. All right. So we know it's going to take in a value, and we also know that it's going to return a value. And I can probably steal something very similar to what we had used in our previous one. So before I do that, I probably need to list those birds. So maybe I say birds, so that way I can differentiate it just a little bit. Or I think in there they call it bird types. I just want to make sure that I keep those separate. And then I'm going to put a list of bird types in there in one big string. I don't really separate it yet, but crow, robin, what are the other ones they're going to put in there? Parrot, eagle. All right, so I'm going to stop. You need to put all of them in there or look at them. And then I'm going to return something out of that. And to do that, I'm going to have to make that comparison. So I'm going to have to compare and see if it exists. So I can put this in my return just like we did before. So we're going to return a value of some sort. We're going to return that true or false. And that's what we're going to do. So when we do this in, so that's our key verb in here is that in. So I'm going to return bird. So that's what we get in there. And I probably should do the lower, just kind of make it so that we're all in the same thing. In, and notice it color codes it. So if I type the right thing, capital T. All right. So very similar to what we did before. So we're getting the value of whatever is in here, whether it's true or false, if it's in this list of items. And it's going to search through there to see if it's hiding in there. Again, it saves us a ton of time. We don't have to work on a list of statements to try to break it up. Perfect. So now we need to come down here and create our main program. So our main program, we need to call this function using the name of a bird type from a user input. So maybe we say user bird equals input. Enter a bird type. So now we have user bird. So whatever the user typed in, and it's coming in as a string. So even if they type in 123 or something weird, it shouldn't hurt our ability. And then we need to call this function to bring it back. So just to kind of follow the format of what we did before, what if we did have bird is equal to, and now we need to pass that into our function up here, bird available, and we're going to pass in user bird. Okay, so here's where it's a little weird, or at least may seem to be, because here we're calling it user bird. We pass it up here and we're just calling it bird. We don't pass that variable up there. We only pass in what's inside of this variable. All right, so have bird equals bird available. So now we're taking what that function, running it, and that true, false, whatever our Boolean code coming back in becomes have bird. All right. And so last, we need to then print your bird, and then we'll use the name of what they called it, which was user bird. Is, and then we'll have the have bird. Now, depending on how horribly I typed in here, this may or may not work, but problem solving is also one of those skills to learn here. So let's call it, save it, and run. Select a bird type. Okay, so let's go back and see if we can figure out what I did there. So name error, user bird is not defined. So it looks like I can't type a capital letter there. Also, I need a space there. So now we'll run it again, save it, enter a bird type. Your bird eagle is true. Okay, now I could make that a little more grammatically correct. And one of the ways I could do this is look at those values. So we could rewrite this sentence to something different. We could actually do this. So have bird. So if have bird equals true, then have bird equals available. So we're changing that. Else, or even we could do an elif. Bird equals false. So if we have the second question, if have bird equals true, we could do this. Elif. So in other words, we have this condition, which I need to actually put up in there instead of there. Have bird equals false. So then I can change it to have bird equals missing. And then I could do my else. So the else is going to run no matter anything else. So you could do it that way. And that way it's going to change depending on which you have in there. So we could have rewritten our sentence. We could use these for these kinds of purposes. So this will just let us change that variable in have bird from a true value to available or to missing. So one of those things we can do. I almost always, our best practice is we use that elif, and that else is that kind of a catch-all for anything else that maybe goes wrong, maybe looks weird. All right. So let's take a look at this fix it. All right. I'm going to try to copy out of here, and it doesn't necessarily work really well. Come back up just a little bit. Yeah. Copy it all. That's okay. All right. So I've got this kind of ugly copied, I guess you could say, because notice it doesn't bring in these tabs. So I need a tab there and a tab there. All right. So here we have a function called how many. So if I look at this, so let's see what kind of things we're looking at here. Get user input. Okay. I'm going to use some white space here to break these down. So here's our function called how many. In there, you're asking a question. How many do you want? Perfect. And then return requested. So requested equals this. We're going to return it, and it comes down into here. So we don't send anything into this function, so it's called a void function. But we do get a value back out of it. So if I'm going to ask users over and over things, why not throw it up into a function? So first thing I'm going to do is we got to fix the quote marks here, so that'll be correct. And we got to go up here and do it the same thing. Go all the way to the end of it. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, make my page bigger. Okay. All right. So when I run this, let's see what it does for me. And it says, oh, invalid syntax. All right. So when I look at this, it's clearly looking at something here. So how many? And it says, oh, there is a function something wrong. So scroll all the way back here. I'm going to look at my, close that real quick. So I'm going to look here. How many? So the first thing we didn't do, did we define this function? Oh, there we go. Now that maybe will work better. Let's try it now. Enter how many you want. 54. Oh, okay. So when I look through here, it says requested is not defined. Requested equals input. Oh, look at that. See, we have lowercase, uppercase, and those are kind of hard to find because your brain will process that. All right. So let's run it again, see if we can make this work. Enter how many you want. 454. Name print is not defined. Okay, hang on. Go back to our code. Oh, misspelling. There we go. Try it again. And that's really, sometimes you'll spot them right away on these. 54 will be ordered. Okay. So what I would encourage you to do then is try it and see what happens if I do something different. So run. Oh, interesting. So it does parrot it even if it's a string, right? That's kind of cool. So we're not converting it to a number. It's just bringing it across as a string. So it clearly does this. All right. So that's our beginning here to that idea of conditional.